In Victoria 2, there are many countries for you to choose from. You got Great Britain for people who can micromanage 6 continents at once. You got Prussia for people who enjoy the garbage sphere of influence mechanic. And you got the US for people who enjoy getting pop-ups every 5 seconds. So why'd you pick Mexico? Mexico in Vicky 2 is quite an interesting country. Has a lot of potential to be a great power. But in the wrong hands, you'll have a real rebel tsunami. And there's a reason for that. Mexico is one of the few nations in Vicky 2 to start off at war. Now don't be alarmed, it isn't anyone strong, it's just Texas. Now, Texas starts out with a military score of 3, so Mexico you start out with a score of 13. So it's safe to say that Texas doesn't really pose much of a threat to you by itself. Keyword by itself. You see, if you start winning against Texas by at least 1 war score, then that will allow the US to intervene in the conflict. For reference, the US has a military score of 20, and they're all normal infantry while you just have irregulars. So you'll see newcomers to Mexico waltzing into Texas without a care in the world, only to get a 2x4 to the head as the US reaches Mexico City. So for Mexico, you have 2 options. Either take a risk and try to win a war against both the US and Texas, or just give up Texas and just don't bother. But maybe there's another way. I found the simplest strategy for beating Texas without getting the US to intervene in the war. And it's just to lose the war. Well, it's actually more of the no peace, no war strategy created by Trotsky. But this time it'll actually work. But, Dr. Rave, how would you prevent the US from joining in the war? You're gonna have to win the war at some point. Well, great question. The answer is very simple. You just have to be in their sphere of influence. Yep, if you're in a great pair sphere of influence, they can't declare war on you. Now, despite what you might be thinking, the US are actually very willing to add you to their sphere of influence, even though you're at war with someone who's practically in their sphere. From the very start, you're gonna want to increase your relations with them. That's because the higher relations you have with them, the faster they gain influence in your nation. Now, you should get to the relations limit, which is 200. And you start out at 90, so only take like 16 to 18 diplomatic points to max out your relations. Now, I'd recommend during your war with Texas that you wait until you're at least -5 war score before you go and wipe their army, which gives you about 1 war score, by the way. Now, after you wipe their army, I recommend you recapture all that territory they took from you. And at this point, the Texas area will probably spam you with peace offerings because they're technically winning the war, but you can just decline them. Now, for me, I'll wait until -50 war score. I'll tell you why later. But around that time, Texas will spam peace offerings that say, if you decline this peace offering, you will gain 1 militancy and 5 war exhaustion. Now, this might look like a bad thing, but it's actually quite a good thing. Now, I'll decline a few of these until I'm at 4 militancy. Then after I wipe the Texas army, I usually capture the province of Lombok. This is to avoid situations where we have a positive war score before we enter the US's sphere. And now we wait. Yep. You just have to wait until you enter the US's sphere. And once you're in it, you can walk into Houston with no resistance and regain Texas. Now that you're done with Texas, you should probably think about your other territorial acquisitions for your empire. And hopefully you became an empire. For you see, if you have at least 4 militancy, and have at least 40% of your upper house being conservative, then you can form the Mexican Empire. That's why we gain the militancy from those peace offerings. Now you may look at that line of all liberals gain 8 militancy and say, now why would I ever do that? Well, let me tell you, you'd be glad you did. You see, if you become the Mexican Empire, then you can manually switch your government type whenever you want. But as Mexico, instead you'll have to wait for the elections. And just letting the people decide on your government type is very bad for your economy. For you see, capitalists are stingy people. They won't build factories even if all your nation's craftsmen are unemployed. So, the best way to get the capitalists to start building factories is to build some yourself. The best way to do that is to adopt an ideology that will allow you to build factories. But if you remain as Mexico, then you'll have to rely on your national focuses to pick your ideology. Which in my opinion, there are other things that you should be spending your national focuses on. Economies in Vicky 2 are a big deal, so creating one early is crucial. In one game as Mexico, I kept getting the conservatives in power, which there was literally nothing I could have done about it. And as a result, I ended up just being a secondary power, while in my other games as the Empire of Mexico, I ended up being an upper great power. So, Believe me when I say that you should become the Empire of Mexico. So, speaking of Empire, you should probably get to expanding yours. In the beginning of the game, you're just barely a secondary power, so you're still able to colonize land. And there's only 3 states in which you can colonize: Oregon, Colorado, and Oklahoma. Now, I usually just colonize Oklahoma first, because if you send an expedition to it, the US won't really contest you. And it has the most amount of people for me to oppress in it. Now, seeing as there's literally no more land on the continent for you to colonize, in order to expand your empire, you'll need to declare war on other nations like you'd normally do. And the closest and most obvious one is the USCA. But there's a pretty major roadblock stopping you from expanding into USCA land. That is, the country you're trying to prevent in Texas, the US. As well as you and Texas, the US will try to expand their influence in the USCA. And if you and the USCA are both in the US's sphere of influence, then you can't go and hit them with a 2x4 and get that Central American land, TM. But there's still a way to get some of that Central American land, TM. You simply have to go to war with them before they're in the US's sphere of influence. About around the time when the US is at friendly with them, create a casus belli on the USCA. And now, seeing as you have higher relations with the US than the USCA has with them, the US should be gaining influence in your nation a whole lot faster than in the USCA, and by proxy, you should be in the US sphere of influence before the USCA. Now, just get out that 2x4 and get some of that Central American land, TM. Turns out Central American land, TM, sucks for moving your troops in. But don't worry, hopefully you're using your national focuses to get more soldier pops, and not for, trying to boost a party's popularity. So that's it. That's where you're gonna wanna do is Mexico. But I may hear you asking, but that is the early game, what about the mid game? Well, truthfully, you can do whatever suits you. You are a secondary power, so you can colonize if you want. You got a whole bunch of states if you want to have a strong economy, and you got a bunch of weak nations in both South America and Asia if you want to do some imperialism. Once you get past the first hurdle, it's all smooth sailing from there. Sometimes. Hey, thank you for watching. And if you made it this far, you should probably like, comment, and or subscribe. I'm going to be making this a series called Sloppy Seconds, because I'm playing secondary powers, and secondary powers aren't the first choice. So leave a comment on which country I should do next, and any criticism you have. And with that, auf Wiedersehen!